Welcome to episode 2 of the Radical Visions for Social Care podcast. In this episode, Frances will share the story of her early life, education and career. This was the second part of a much longer conversation, and you can hear Simon's story in episode 1. You can also read blog versions of each episode on our website, radicalvisions.co.uk/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy.
So where did it all begin for you, like as a human being, and then how did you get into this?
My family, I'm born Glasgow, East End of Glasgow, the Gorbals. My mum's English, my dad was Scottish. I've got 2 sisters, and we had, quite a normal working class kind of upbringing, I would say. And my mum and dad's relationship, they had their ups and downs, and but they were I don't know where it came from, but they had really good values. We weren't particularly religious. My dad's side of the family Catholic, my mum's side Church of England. There was all this kind of stuff that went on about throwing you out to chapel on a Sunday and your best gear, but they never went, it was all that kind of stuff. So I went to Catholic school, all of that, but it didn't, religion and me didn't really get on. But being a nice and good, decent human being was the kind of thing that I started to aspire to. But my mum and dad really were very, very good at, you mentioned the Holocaust. My mum and dad would, when we were young, they would say, you need to come and sit down and watch this. If it's on, maybe a documentary in the telly, you have to. And we would have those conversations about, what happened in the world, really. So it started very much, I think, in there about what's right, what's wrong, and in relation to just being a human being and being a decent human being, really. I don't really think there's any much more to that, and I thank them for that, really, because I definitely think that's where I got it from. They were really, they took the time to stop you doing whatever you were doing and come and take part in this, have this conversation. You need to, know what's happened, slavery, all of those terrible things that we do to each other, as you said, as human beings. So they had just good values, I think. I left school at 16. I worked in a factory. It's my first job.
You'd moved out to Cumbernauld, though, at some point.
I moved to Rutherglen when I started school in Rutherglen. So it must have been 4 or 5 when I moved to Rutherglen. And then when I was 7, we moved to Cumbernauld. So that was like Glasgow overspill, they called it. And John's got a wee experience of that as well. So when there was too many people in Glasgow, they built these other places. And then people moved out to these other places. But actually, to be fair, there was a lot of incentives for people to do that. So my dad got a job, and if you got the job, you got a house automatically, and so a council house or whatever. And we were told, so we lived obviously in tenements, and I like telling the grandchildren now about how when I was wee, I had an outside toilet, and how we 3 of us slept in the same bed, which is all true, and how there was a potty under the bed, and my sisters used to wake me up to hold their hand while they went to the potty. So many times during the night, I'd be holding. That's my older and my younger sister. Do you know what I mean? All of those stories. But so I love telling those stories. So when we went out to Cumbernauld, we were told we were going to live in the country. Can you imagine it?
The green fields.
I had this picture as a 7-year-old, a kind of cottagey green space, and flowers round the door. And then we went to Cumbernauld. And if you've been to Cumbernauld, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not exactly a typical country space. So, however, the house that we were in, the back of it was actually all fields and still is. And we had, I suppose a lot of freedom and a really nice 3-bedroomed house and lots of things that people, and didn't have an inside toilet and bath and all that. So, so we lived there went to school there. Never really travelled terribly far from home, really. I've always been around here, and I left school at 16. I suppose the one thing I would say is that people didn't probably have very high expectations. My mum and dad didn't really have, so I don't think there was any sort of sense that I should go and do anything kind of academic. You know, it's get out and get a job. That's, you know, and they worked, in fact, my dad was a semi-skilled electrician, so it's all very much what you did, you know, go out and get a job and bring some money into the house and all that sort of stuff. But after about a year of doing that, I was looking around at all these lovely women in their 40s who were my pals. I was a wee 16-year-old, you know what I mean? So they were looking after me. And I just thought, I'm going to be that woman sitting here doing this job. And I can't do that. So I was making bits of Olivetti typewriters and feeding the line and doing all of that assembly line. So I went back to college at that point and did some, believe it or not, secretarial. Shorthand typing, accounting. Yeah, did another O level, that kind of thing. So, and I left there. But I was rubbish at it. I really was bad at the typing. I couldn't spell for toffee. And
I can't believe it, Francis. That's not my experience of you at all.
You're such a fibber. She's so kind.
I think Simon and I maybe been your editors over the years.
Everybody that's worked with me has been my editor. Yes, some kinder than others. Yeah, that's okay. I think there's a slight dyslexia there somewhere. Right. Actually, I think I repeat the same mistakes over and over again in my spelling and my grammar. I can't seem to learn that part of it, so I've kind of given up. Yeah. But it did make you think. It did make me think probably I wasn't that bright for a long time. Yeah. Not as bright as all you guys. Or you academic guys that have been at university and that. So yeah. So anyway, I wasn't very, you can imagine why I wasn't very good at typing. Could you imagine taking the letter in again and again with a bit of Tipex, another bit of Tipex, another bit of Tipex? I was like, oh, this isn't working very. So I ended up selling televisions and vision hire, renting out to houses as a receptionist, and worked the engineers' schedules and sold, you know, renting out tellies and all that front of house. I was quite good at that. I bounced onto the floor. And I was quite good at selling the tellies and stuff like that. So I didn't need too much of the spelling. I got away with it for a while. And then they made me redundant because they were shutting that one down. And I was like, I really wanted to do something more with my life. But to be honest, I couldn't sit and go, I really wanted to go and be a social worker, or, you know, but I did think about nursing, and my friend went into nursing and I really liked the idea of it, but I was quite squeamish.
Sorry?
So I thought, how am I going to be a nurse if I don't like blood?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's why I went to psychiatry. I said, I'll avoid all the blood and that if I go to, which is nonsense, by the way. So don't think that's an answer, because when you're training to be a nurse, you have to be able to do it. So I just had to overcome all those phobias and stuff once I got into it. But yeah, that's why I went into psychiatry. I think probably, and this is interesting as well, actually, at the time, you probably needed hires to get into general nursing, but you didn't need them if you were going into psychiatry, because obviously folk that were being supported in these places like Woodley Hospital and Lents Castle and learning disability was a different certificate, but but in both of those you didn't need to hire, so you could get in with lower qualifications to work in those places. Do you
remember what was the first institutional experience you had then? When that was?
The first institutional experience I had was I went for the job in Woodley Hospital and I got it, and I was going to be doing my training. So it was the old style training. It wasn't even the modular training. But what they did was, so they had intakes at different times, but what they said was, you if you want to do your training, you come in and you work as an auxiliary nurse first. So basically, I think they were testing out whether or not you could stick it, having worked in the institutions or asylums. So the first experience I had at all was being walked around after having been shown a video of how to restrain people.
Right.
So there was this whole thing about, how to restrain people. And the video was like a guy who was upset because he wasn't getting his medication or something to go home for the weekend. And then there was nurses coming from everywhere lining his limbs and stuff like that. And it was all, this was on a video, and that was a training that we got before we went to work in the psychiatric hospital. And then this nursing officer, who was a really nice guy actually, was walking us around the different wards and showing us the different wards before we started on the Monday. That's a nursing assistant, an auxiliary nurse. So I wasn't a trained nurse. So, and he was taking me into all the different wards and stuff. And he took me into the locked wards, which was where obviously they kept under lock and key people that were seen to be what we would call the freedom fighters, Simon, the folk that were not happy to be quiet and silent about their situation. And I remember, and I was wee, so I'm less than 5 foot, but at that time I was like a size 12, so I was 20 and a size 12, so I was really quite a slight woman. And he was talking about, and he said, and he just looked and he said, if you, I forget this, if you end up working in here, he says, you probably just have to work out how to talk to people. It's funny enough. That's a great tip. So, and then I was sent to work in the wards which were what they called the geriatric wards then, and it was all people with dementia, and that was just like horrendous. I'll never forget. This is really harsh, isn't it? I don't know whether, but I'll never forget the noise which would be coming to you as you walk down the corridor, the smell that would be coming to you as you walk down the corridor. And I lost weight. So I was on the Woody Lee diet. So, which was, I lost 10 pounds in 10 days. I couldn't eat because of what I seen. And it was that way that it was just like it was a different, you called it hell, but it was like that. It was like the kind of things that my mum and dad used to sit me down and make me watch.
Yeah.
You know, it was this kind of, just, people aren't living like this. This just doesn't. So my brain was constantly trying to work out, what am I doing about this? You know, in those first couple of weeks even, just like, what do I do? Do I just run and don't come back? Which I think a lot of people would do. Or do I stay and try and work out, what do I do about this? Because right from that moment, that I just knew that it wasn't right and we needed to do something about it. But I was like a nursing assistant at this point in 20. So knowing the answer to that, I wasn't really very clear. But that was my first experience. So I decided I needed to stick with it, and I did. And then
well, Frances, for listeners, like, just to, like, Woody Lee probably doesn't mean very much to many people now. Can you give people a sense of, like, I suppose, what it was supposed to be, its context, its size, and where it, I don't even remember where it is now, wasn't it? Is that North Glasgow as well? Or?
All in the north side. It was just outside. Is it part of Kirkintilloch?
Right.
And it was a psychiatric hospital, probably older, I think, than Woody Lee, wasn't it? It was in late 18...
older than Lennox Castle.
Lennox Castle, sorry. Yeah, late 1800s it was built. So there was a sort of old-fashioned building and then a bit like some of the other hospitals in Scotland, they'd been bits added on, you know, wards and built really to kind of extend into the grounds. But the main bit was a big tower and the great big corridors and these old, you know, big wards. And people came into psychiatric hospital because they had an acute psychiatric condition. But what happened in Woodley was many people never left. So like, you know, Lennox Castle and other hospitals that in Scotland and elsewhere, it was almost like once they came in and been treated for any length of time, they became very institutionalized by the institution itself, and people were just stuck there. But you know, they were really, really stuck in these places where you could see the medication having an effect. So you would have these different parts to the hospital. So there would be admission wards where people would be still maybe coming in and out and getting some treatment. There would be a male and a female admission ward. There was the locked wards, which were male and female, where people with the most extreme issues or behaviours, conditions would be sent. Some people would be sent up there in a very short time basis, but actually, again, a lot of people ended up living. They're always living their lives in these locked wards. There was, and then you would have all these long-term wards where people were just living their lives, you know, with they would go out to work during the day at whatever bit of job that they had in the hospital or whatever, and they would come back. And then you had over 65s. So as a psychiatric hospital, it developed wards for, again, admission, where people were
psychogeriatric.
Where people were starting to show signs of dementia or other conditions to do with age and mental health. But you also would have people who had other conditions that are other diagnoses like manic depression or whatever. They'd had it all their life, or schizophrenia, they'd had it all their life. But mostly you were within Woodley, it was really people they were starting to cope with the massive number of people that were suffering different types of dementia diagnosis and assessing them. And so you had admission wards, and then you had long-term wards. So people would be moved on there basically to live 30 people in a ward to be cared for until they died, really, with dementia. And then, other chronic mental health conditions you would see people with as well. Huntington's chorea, things that again would be life-limiting and degenerative. They would end up in these places as well, and that's where they would live and be supported, cared for. But it wasn't terribly, what's the word? I don't know what I was going to say there. It wasn't, I mean, I wouldn't have said it was somewhere that looked after people who were there with long-term psychiatric needs, looked after their health well either, you know. So it was a mixture of all of those things.
And I think one of the things, I as a non coming into this work, like, it's mad, isn't it? That my background is a philosopher, and and so I never had any professional training. And one of the things that always was a grey zone for me, like I just didn't really know, was the medication. Like, and actually, I remember for people we got out of Lennox Castle, there was always this just like seemed like this litany of drugs that people were on, most of which seemed to be tranquilizers. And the battle to get people off. I mean, I don't know if my impressions are probably vague and wrong, but my impression was almost everybody was tranquilized to a very high degree, that it was just, so, which is weird that you institutionalize people physically and then you tranquilize them, isn't it?
Well, I think, the tranquilizers obviously came later in terms of the behavior of how we manage mental health issues. So a lot of people would have been in and out of institutions and things like ECT would have been used, and also some other invasive procedures like lobotomies and different things would have been used. You could go through people's that had been in there a long time, and you would see a lot of history of those interventions. But obviously when the medication came in, I think that made a massive difference to some of those other interventions, and people were given major tranquilizers. And now the issue with major tranquilizers, a massive issue with that, was that they had their own really debilitating side effects. So if you would see people really disabled physically by the side effects of the tranquilizers that they were taking to help them manage their voices or whatever. In amongst all of that, you've got people have been taken away from their lives, their families, any kind of normal things that make life good, routines, love, anything that gives us hope, really, and put into these institutions. And so getting back out of that was really, I think, really difficult for people. It was almost then they were stuck because they were tranquilized. They had side effects of the tranquilizers. We often see that physical manifestation of that, where people were, just standing, rocking, rolling their fingers, doing all these kind of physical, and then, and obviously the medication also, it really dampened everybody down. So then just even that kind of having the determination maybe to make something else happen in your life or get out or ask for something, I think was probably quite hard for people who were in that situation. So
and like thinking about what happened to you, I mean, my memory is that, and I suppose also when we were getting people out of Lennox Castle, I can understand in a way and sympathise with staff, often like you, like young people looking for a job. This thing that we're describing as hell, which I think is literally hell, is also a normal. Like if you've got no context,
very
it's
normalized.
So you kind of imagine it's quite easy for people to go, oh, this feels like hell. But if I dull my senses enough, and if I can kind of find a track through this and some positives, and there's always little things, rays of hope and things. So, but you didn't, I suppose I was kind of curious on like, why do you think, because that isn't what happened to you. I think from memory, you did decide very early on this was not right and set yourself a kind of path. Can you describe something about what was going on for you and how you found a way out of this?
The biggest kind of moment like that was actually not in Woody Lee. It was in quite early on. We were sent over to Lennox Castle. So I went to Lennox Castle.
Part of your training.
Part of my training. So you had so you'd have theory in the different areas. Lennox Castle obviously was around people with learning disabilities, and we would also get training, go to do things like obstetrics, see so many births or work in theatres. And so we did all of that as part. So this was part of my training, same as it was with everybody else. And I went to, so I was already very aware of what was happening in Woody Lee, and a lot of it was systematic. It wasn't, I didn't see real cruelty or physical cruelty there, but I knew everything. I knew so much of it was wrong, and and I did see things, and I'd certainly intervened when I seen it. But you're right. You're young, and but when something's right, when something's not. I think that's the bottom line. And every single day, I suppose when I was in Woody Lee, every day, everything that I did, I knew that I could do better. Do you know what I mean? If I went in, I could make somebody's day better. I could talk to people. I could do their hair. I could get nice music on for somebody that I was, helping or supporting. I did what I needed to do in that very tiny part of me. And I was then a student. So when I went to Woody Lee, though, it was just to Lennox Castle, sorry. It was just like in a different level, because I was sent to this ward where there was physical abuse happening, people being restrained and hit, and I was like, so the initial feelings I had in Woody Lee when I first went in, like, I'm in a different world. It was like I'm in a completely different planet, and I suppose I became a whistleblower. So I think that really early on in my career, so I became a whistleblower, and even people that knew me in my class, I had some support, don't get me wrong, I had some close friends and some support, but it was amazing how people distanced themselves from you, how you were treated. The police were involved, the woman was a ward sister, she was suspended. It was a big deal. And it was a big noise, I think, in Lents Castle that somebody student had actually come in and said these things. But what happened in the end of that was that nobody else supported anything that I'd said. I complained about 3 separate incidents, and I told people, who was there and stuff. So in the end, though, nobody backed me up. So the person just went back to their job, and the guy that was heading up, I don't remember the guy's name, but heading up the nursing side of the hospital at that time, called me up to his office. I'll never forget it. Yep. I'd just like to let you know that nobody has backed your story, and with his sister so-and-so is back at her job, and I just wanted you to know. And I was like, I'm like, well, I hope you can sleep at night. I remember like 20. Hope you can sleep at night. I've done everything I can. Are you doing what you can do? It's like giving this guy a complete roasting, and he sat and took it. Right. And then he just went, all I can say, Francis, is that your stories, your not stories, your complaints were far too detailed to be lies. And I was like, but it was like, and then when I went back to Woody Lee, it was really helpful in a way, because when I went back to Woody Lee, I was the whistleblower. So every situation I went into, people knew me. By reputation. So I would get, and you've no idea what people did. I could tell you some stuff on this podcast that would turn your hair as a young woman, what some of the guys in Woody Lee then did, thinking they would get a reaction out of me. But they never did. Never got a reaction out of me. I just made out it never happened. But they do put me at risk, with people in Lents in Woody Lee, to try and get some kind of reaction. And yeah, it was horrible. So I had that reputation, and I just thought, I'm living up to that reputation. and that's what I did. And I became that person the whole of my career in nursing. I was the person who would go into a ward and say, no, even as a student, we're not doing this. Whatever power I had, I would use, and I would complain where I needed to, and I had that reputation, so I might as well embrace it. And then when I qualified, I went to Stop Hill Hospital in the psychiatric units there. And I just, it was just like everything it was so bad. Like some of the stuff there, it was all about staff, like drinking and, all this. So I ended up being the person who was whistleblowing on the staff that were drinking and people getting sacked. But I get promoted really quickly.
Promote you out of there.
Eh?
Promote you out of get you off the shop.
Not out of it. No, not out of it. There were some people, obviously, you're not alone. There's people that know that things need to be better, but it's hard, I suppose, to get people to do what needs to be done. And so no, I was promoted where I was. I wasn't promoted out of it. I was promoted in it.
Yeah.
So much as I was a pain, I think there was a lot of people in management realised that I was somebody that would get things done, and I would then get sent lots of the people where there was lots of issues, and I would have to. So I was promoted and went, and then I get sent over. I was very fortunate actually, in as much that I was allowed to go and do my general training. I was promoted when I was 26, 27 to a ward sister grade. And then I went over to do my general, but I was getting paid as I was seconded. So it paid me as a ward sister, which was unheard of, really. So I think I was getting back from the system, believe it or not. Within the system, there were people that were supporting that change. Do you know what I mean? And I was getting it back. So I went with that, and then I came back and I worked in acute psychiatry. I was ward manager there. And then I get kind of headhunted to go and do this rather unusual job, which was it was a European funded job, and it was what's the word I'm looking for? Vocational training and rehabilitation out in Woodley. So they'd said to me, come back out to Woodley. We've got this resource centre. It's empty. We've got £150,000 we're getting a year from Europe. We don't know what to do with it. But it's got to be, for vocational training and whatever. And then I took this step completely out of my comfort zone, where obviously I knew when I suppose all I wanted to do was, at that point, if I'm in charge of this ward, I can challenge, I can set the standards, and I can expect things, and I can challenge. And that's what I'd done up until that point. And then I completely out of my comfort zone and back to Woodley and set up this resource centre out there in partnership with SAMH. So I had staff from SAMH that were vocational trainers, and we employed gardeners and carpenters and just a whole load of people. And then I had some nursing colleagues that came to work with us. And then I worked with the colleges, and I worked out in the North Sector, and we had some sites out in Hossel Park and crafts and arts and crafts and different things like that. So really quite, and I had a budget. So before anybody else had a budget, like as a ward manager, because that was my grade, really, was ward manager still. I was kind of working with money and, a whole different set of group of people, really, that were outside my profession, that I had to kind of negotiate and work out. And my job was really to help shut the hospital, to work with those people who were in these wards stuck, that had been there for years. So part of this was a big part of the rehabilitation plan, really, is to get people thinking, bringing people in from the colleges as well. So we did some really, ordinary, stuff about learning life skills. And we worked with people in the wards to help get them ready to do just all sorts of stuff, that might be helping them get ready to go and then out. But we also worked with a lot of people that had mental health issues in the North Sector of Glasgow, and they came in to do some of the stuff. It was interesting. So they came into the hospital to do some of the stuff that we'd set up. So we'd set up all sorts of computer training, and we had a big garden centre on the grounds and greenhouses and all sorts. So they came in and did that. And a lot of people from the hospital did that. So people were learning and getting out and doing something different. They were occupied. And the community was coming in. We were going out to the community. The colleges were involved. So it was a whole different, but my God, was I hated in that hospital. At the time, I was really hated.
When was it? This is in the 80s sometimes.
Is it? Aye.
No.
I left. So I went from there, from that job, and set it all up and managed it. And we got awards for it, actually. We were awarded Scottish NHS awards for innovation and stuff. We weren't the only hospital in Glasgow and doing that. We got, I think, Gartlock got the same money, and the people decided how to use it differently, really. But it was pretty different for the time, and there's a lot of sabotage again. You'd have all these things set up and nobody would turn up, so we would have to go round the wards and just go in and say, right, so and so and so and so are supposed to be at this, with us today. Can just came up to collect them. Just take no turn. And then I went for a job as clinical. I was asked really to think about going for this job as clinical nurse specialist for rehabilitation. So my job then was very specifically to work with all the voluntary organisations and to help people leave the hospital. But through both of those jobs, there was a lot of, I would go out and my tyres would be flat, or people would set off the alarms up at the resource centre. I was off all the time out in the middle of the night because alarms were getting set off at the resource. People were very threatened, very worried about their jobs. It didn't understand. I don't think there was a lot of negativity, and also a lot of people obviously supporting it as well. As I say, or else I don't think I would have been continued, within the system and in different places you had allies. But it was a trying time.
You became a mum in the middle of all that, did you?
Well, I was a mum. I was a mum in 86.
86, yeah.
So just a year before I got promoted to be ward sister, I was working in Stop Hill. I had Dave. So
what was the bridge between, because you went to Richmond Fellowship, was that immediately after that work, or did you?
Yeah, so I worked as a clinical nurse specialist with all the different voluntary organisations. Of course, Richmond Fellowship was one of those organisations. And there was I know it sounds crazy, but there was a deadline. There was a kind of financial deadline in 1993 where the hospitals wanted to get as many people out.
It was a change in the board and lodgings regulations, I remember.
So, and it meant that financially people would lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or the hospital.
The council or the health service would lose money. Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons I'd been given this job, is to get everybody. That didn't bother me why, just as long as we were actually getting people out. So we did all sorts of stuff. And so one of the things we'd done was there was two houses on the grounds, and we supported people to leave the hospital, but actually just went for the wards into two houses on the grounds to. Again, it was the kind of stupid rules often. It was like, it was a small ward of 14, 15 people or something that was a rehab ward, and you had to go through the rehab ward before you could move out. Nonsense. Do you know what I mean? That's just nonsense. You just need to have the right support and help, and you can learn skills anywhere. And we'd already started, obviously trying to support people much wider than that in the other project I was doing. So we were working with people at Richmond Fellowship saying, you don't need people to be ticking all these boxes. Actually, if we just move folk into these houses as a stepping stone, and then we'll work out how to move them on. But then I was headhunted really by Richmond Fellowship to go and work with them. And I'd applied for another kind of job at the time, and because the hospital was closing, and that was my job. So there was this thing about, where are you going in the middle of this? So I ended up decided to go with where people were going, really, which was the voluntary sector, and went to the Richmond Fellowship, and I worked there for 3 years as an area manager. The only job I was ever demoted without doing a thing. It grew around me, and all these people, like, it was tiny when we was Richmond Fellowship. Scotland came later, so it was part of the UK Richmond Fellowship when I was there. And there was like the director, myself, one other area manager, and then Doreen Kelly. And it was so small, the team were small, the amount of services that were small was small. So I only worked there 3 years, but my goodness, it mushroomed like I don't know what. But they did a lot of really positive things for me. Professionally, I went on PASS, which was one of the things that was a bit of another kind of mind-blowing thing. And the other thing I never mentioned was that I did a master's in community care. So when I was doing my must have been the clinical nurse specialist job, I was supported by the NHS. I mean, I got a lot out of my NHS time. I think, support, when I think back, a lot of people probably didn't, but I was supported and they paid for me to go and do the first year, which was the diploma year. And then when I came over to Richmond, I did the master's year. They agreed to let me carry on and do the master's. So I'd done a master's in community care as well, which at least made me feel I wasn't quite as stupid as I did when I left school at 16, even though I still can't spell. I thought, no, all right, I've got a master's degree, right? I'm as good as them. So yeah, so that was and again, all that was really important learning, though, but it's also where I met Gina, who was John's colleague, Gina Hagan.
Yeah.
And so that's how I met Gina. So
doing the same course.
Doing the same course, And I was, when I went to Richmond, I was on. They joined this alliance of people through European Social Fund again to develop the person-centred planning consortium, and Dorian and I were selected to go and be part of that. And that's why I was saying it was over a long period of time. It was almost like a long change process as well. So it started to help me realise, because before that, when I worked to help people move out of Woodley Hospital, I was still a lot of people moving into core and cluster. I was involved in setting up and developing those services and helping people get out and finding people for it and stuff, for the placements. And but you knew that a lot of that was still trans-institutionalised, and people were still moving into smaller institutions a lot of the time. And I was already hearing the people saying, well, I don't really want to live here, I'd like my own place, and all of that being, oh, well, we have to get the money, and all of that was happening in those moments in it. So when I went on PASS, and then I went on the person-centred planning course, the consortium, I suppose that just helped me realise I was always looking for the next tools that helped me think about how do we do it differently, and all the way through that. So it just helped me kind of get clearer and clearer about, it should be one person at a time. Why are you even thinking about anything else? And interestingly, through that process, I think I was probably Richmond Fellowship the first person to support somebody to move out as a one person into their own home. Right.
From Lennox Castle.
From Lennox Castle.
Around that time.
Yeah, and with an individualised support package where she was involved in all of the interviewing and all of that. And we set up, I just did my own thing to a large extent. I was left and allowed to do my own thing, to be fair, with hesitancy, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure about that. Yeah. But even things like the contracts and stuff like that, I changed the contracts of employment and ask, you know what they say, ask for forgiveness, not permission. So we did all of that, and women moved out into her own house. So that was before I obviously moved in.
I didn't realise that, Frances. Goodness me. Yeah.
So you two met at a recruitment fair, is that?
No,
we met through the person-centred plan.
Yeah.
Then I'm at the recruitment fair as Richmond Fellowship.
And Simon's there as inclusion, tentative brokerage.
Talking about that big event that was. Yeah, I don't even remember what I did then. That then got into the newspapers. No, you're not thinking about that thing where they said you're selling off the patients. So
fit for sale.
Yeah.
Shush! Don't remind me of that day.
The day that I went up there, we had a wee spot each, where the staff from Lennox Castle could come and find out about our organisations and talk to us about job opportunities. And I was in one with a colleague, I don't remember who it was, and you were in another one on your own with a flip chart and a Starman, an Inclusion Glasgow. And I'm thinking, and I kept coming in and saying, so tell me about your jobs, Simon. So do you not remember that?
Not really. I mean, I remember talking to you about it, very early on, but I can't remember when.
Honestly, I didn't. You didn't tell me about the jobs. That's how I found out about the job.
Oh, right. Okay. I don't. I've no memory of that.
at the job fair, I'm like, well, I'm thinking, why did you not come and ask me
Yeah.
to apply for it? Because that was how I knew about it. And
Yeah, no,
I think I'll maybe apply, Simon. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's funny, isn't it? Looking back, there's a lot of bits that are a bit fuzzy now. I don't really remember the details at all. I do remember an event, but that's about it. And I remember that news item that was floating around at the time, which I think was after that. So that's why I remember the kind of politics of it in a funny way.
Yeah. There was a Daily Record front page article about how the whole process could be boiled down to selling the sick for sale, and that was a traumatic day, I think, when that headline came out.
Thanks so much for listening to episode 2 of the Radical Visions for Social Care podcast. Tune in next time to hear John's story. Thank you again, and goodbye.